Hey, detoxers, welcome to another episode of the Disinfo Detox. The Trump administration is seeking $1 billion settlement from the University of California, Los Angeles. And this is after the Department of Justice had accused the school of anti-Semitism and other civil rights violations. UCLA is the first public university to be targeted by a widespread funding freeze over allegations of civil rights violations related to anti-Semitism and affirmative action. President Donald Trump has frozen or paused federal funds over similar allegations to other elite private colleges. For example, in recent weeks, the administration has struck deals with Brown University for $50 million and Columbia University for $221 million, while they're currently in a battle with Harvard University. To help us unpack what's going on here, I am joined by UCLA's Caroline Luce, a historian whose work sits at the intersection of labor, history, Jewish studies, and digital humanities. Caroline Luce, welcome back to the Disinfo Detox.
Thanks for having me, Nolan.
Heck yeah, always a pleasure to have you here unpacking these issues for us. And the time since Trump administration has charged this $1 billion fine against UCLA, California Governor Gavin Newsom has referred to it as extortion and says California will not bow down and plans to take it to the courts. So for folks who maybe haven't been following this story or don't know what's going on down at UCLA, Carolyn, what can you tell us? What's going on at UCLA and how did this emerge?
Thanks. I guess you really have to start back in the spring of 2023 with our Palestine Solidarity encampment. We were one of a few encampments that really did catch the eye of the national media. I would say Columbia and UCLA's encampments were probably covered more intensely than other encampments. That doesn't mean the repression was any less in those other places, but we did get a lot of coverage in the early days, being in Los Angeles, as we are. And within hours, that encampment was attacked. It was broken into, and so it gradually got more and more fortified under duress. Until eventually it was actually physically attacked overnight. Many of us who were keen to protect our students and defend our students' rights were absolutely horrified by that attack. It's really hard to overstate how violent it was. Some student had 20 staples in his head. His head was busted open. People had physical damages. I think it was something like 8 different students had to go to the hospital. One of them almost died. They had permanent lasting damage. And the next day, the university chose to call in, I think, 5 different law enforcement agencies. There were something like 1,500 cops on our campus who then imposed their own form of violence on the encampment to clear it out. And really, since that day, there has not been a real reckoning with what happened on our campus. And instead, a lot of very disingenuous narratives have been circulating ever since. One of those narratives is born of a 30-second video that features a relatively notorious provocateur. He called me a terrorist the first day at the encampment. His first name is Eli. I can't remember his last name now. Where he approaches one of these now fortified entrances to the encampment, which again, fortified to protect themselves from the attacks that they were receiving. He approaches, demands to go. This pathway he was trying to go down is on the side of the undergraduate library, but it is not the only way to get to the place he wanted to go. He was being intentionally provocative because he wanted to go into the encampment and harass people. And they told him no. And he starts crying about how this is because I'm a Jewish student. That video was played in the Congress when our chancellor was dragged before the committee that Virginia Fox runs. I cannot remember the name of it. Their whole report was a compendium of incidents, both minor and I guess more major on our campus over the past 10 years that have been this kind of ongoing drone about UCLA being anti-Semitic. That has continued. There were several lawsuits in the wake of the encampment. And the sequence of events last week was that UCLA announced they would be settling one of those lawsuits. It involves 4 students. And there was a counter, 4 students alleging they were victims of anti-Semitic discrimination. There is a counter lawsuit filed by a bunch of folks who were calling themselves interveners who were actually in the encampment when it was physically attacked. So there's 2 civil rights lawsuits. UCLA was told by the judge in the second lawsuit that they should not reach any kind of settlement in the other until both cases could be fully adjudicated. UCLA ignored that judge's ruling and instead pursued a settlement in this first civil rights lawsuit with its Jewish students claiming to be victims of anti-Semitic discrimination. They paid out $6.45 million, not only to the plaintiffs themselves, but also to an array of dubious Jewish organizations, including the ADL and the local Jewish Federation here. Lord knows why either of those organizations need our money. And within 24 hours, the DOJ announced that they would be pursuing their own investigation. So all that to say, UCLA's attempt to sort of obey in advance or settle this so as to avoid this kind of federal attack did not work. And now there's been actually sort of a gradual awareness. Originally, it was reported there was $330 million of NEH and NIH funds, what's the science? NSF, excuse me, National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health funds. Further reporting has shown it's actually $584 million worth of federal funds that was being withheld. And then now they're talking about $1 billion. So that is what we're facing on our campus. Over the weekend, the UC launched a pretty tepid, Stand With UC campaign. They're also asking for donations. As far as I know, neither they nor the state of California has officially announced they will be suing yet, although Governor Newsom did pledge that they'd be suing over the weekend. So we'll see. We're hoping they will. But yeah, that's the situation as it stands today.
And I should preface this question by saying that I know, at least I get this a lot from students. They think on a university campus, we all know each other and know what's going on. But university campuses are very large. I know very little of what's going on in the physical science, for example. It's just not in my department, so I don't know. So it's impossible for any one person to know everything that's going on campus. But I noticed a lot of we saw a lot of these numbers about these giant spikes in acts of anti-Semitism on college campuses, so these huge percentages. But the evidence I saw kind of was mixed. I remember I saw a video of a woman who said she was assaulted and really was kind of a flag brushed up against her. Or there was the case you're talking about the individual Eli who was blocked from walking on campus. Now I have seen some anti-Semitic rhetoric on campuses that was recorded on video, but 2 things about that. One is I don't know if the people saying it were actually part of the encampment or if these are provocateurs or actors. Also, AI is a possibility. Not to say it's false. I'm just saying it's not corroborated evidence. So with that in mind, do you have any kind of sense from your anecdotal experience on campus? Have you witnessed these acts of anti-Semitism, or can you shed any light on that, or is that something you can't speak to?
I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do. This is a really, really large campus, just physically sprawling. So one of the incidents that was reported in the spring, for example, was a swastika that had been spray painted onto a building. I never saw it. I never go to that particular location. And by the time I did, it was gone. So it is actually pretty difficult to follow. I'd say a couple things in response, and then maybe I'll speak more to the anti-Semitism piece. I mean, one thing to know is that there is a similar spike in incidents of hate crimes against Muslim students and people of color. So they actually did a report. I can dig that out for you if you want the link of a survey and report of incidents of harassment and abuse that Muslim and students of color were facing in the spring. Those tracked and correlated completely.
We'll find it and put it in the description for listeners and viewers. Okay.
For sure. And then most recently, in these past few weeks, someone has been vandalizing offices all over campus. So one of our colleagues and fellow UC-AFT members had it wasn't personal to her. It was just taped to her office that something about Black people being inferior and they should be enslaved. Ethnic studies buildings have had people come through their halls and rip down all of their signs, anything that was sort of disapproved of. And just yesterday, they announced that they'd arrested someone committing similar crimes in the African American Studies building. So, one of the big challenges here at UCLA is we're a really large campus. We're a public university and we're an incredibly porous campus. So unlike UCSC, there's not one entrance into campus. There are at least 8. It is very difficult to seal off the campus that way. And as you suggested, during the encampment, I mean, there were folks coming and going all over the place. There was simply no way to kind of lock down the campus. So at USC, by comparison, on the other side of town, they are basically able to fortify their entire campus. You still have to show a badge to get into campus at USC. You have to have a reason to be there. You can't simply just want to go see the pretty buildings. And UCLA is both principled and physically unable to do that, right? We are by principle an open campus. So when, for example, the encampment was attacked, there were people in my life who are Angelenos who recognized people in the video as being provocateur types, who, for example, had been part of the mobilizations in Glendale when the school board there was trying to pass a initiative on trans rights. Many of these people were absolutely known provocateurs. And one of the examples that the Congress used, at least, to hang anti-Semitism on the encampment was a picture of a van that he's an unwell person drives around that has screeds painted all over it. Like, I think it's pretty common sense to identify a van like that as not being UCLA students. And yet it is hung on the students who were involved in the encampment. So I think you're speaking to a really tricky issue here, which is that the boundaries of our campus are very, very porous. Even when it's young people of college age, it's not clear that those young people of college age are actually UCLA students. And there's been no sort of effort to disentangle that at all, in part because even if we did, it would be a sort of unenforceable thing. One of our new TPM rules, for example, is that if a UCPD officer or any of the private security firms, there are multiple that have been hired, ask you for your ID, you have to produce it, I think, in an effort to sort of draw these distinctions. But that is imposed after the fact. It's a very porous place.
And those are called time, place, manner.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Hey folks, Nolan Higdon here, interrupting real quick just to ask a favor. Can you please like, follow, comment, and subscribe to the podcast? It really helps get the show out to more people. If you also have a couple extra bucks in your pocket, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. You can go to patreon.com/Disinfo Detox, and you become a paid subscriber for as little as $5 a month. It really helps get the show to more people, allows me to bring in more people and create more content. You can find a link to that in the show description. All right, let's get back to the show. Yeah, because I think it's an interesting question. I mean, there were so many assumptions about the protesters and what they were saying in the encampments, but I didn't see a lot of data on it. I mean, one of the shows that I watch weekly, I guess I kind of hate watch it at this point, is Real Time with Bill Maher, where, just weekly he lambasts these student protesters all being pro-Hamas, anti-Semites. But, you were around the encampments and some of the students. I mean, how fair of a description is that to say these folks were all pro-Hamas and all anti-Semites who partake in these encampments you saw at UCLA?
I mean, I will say this. Jewish students were in the encampment. They held seders there. They held Shabbat dinner there. They were not the majority. I don't mean to overstate how many Jewish students were involved in the encampment. But there's a moment that I always tell people, because I have been receiving not questions about this, allegations about this in my personal life for almost 2 years now. It is never what happened. It is, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And I think, being that your show about disinformation, this swirl of rumors was really real. And you mentioned before, these are really big campuses. I don't know everyone on campus. That's what we were actually hearing from our members, is they were just as susceptible to the swirl, right? Campus, all classes went remote pretty quickly. People were really avoiding campus if they felt uncomfortable. And so they became part of that same swirl of information as anybody else. So the example I always give is that the night that the encampment was attacked, which again was vicious and violent, an hours long attack, the student leaders at Hillel, which is actually one of the institutions that our settlement is giving money to, the student leaders defied the actual quote unquote adult leaders of Hillel. They defied that leadership structure and sent out their own statement that basically said, stand down. It basically said, look, these are people in the community. These are our fellow students. You are coming here to say that you're supporting us. We do not want this kind of support. Leave our classmates alone. Stop violently attacking them. Stand down. No one is asking you to be here. So I think that it speaks to the ways that the misrepresentation is fundamentally in a kind of narrative of black or white, that these are easy distinctions to make. No one in my experience was ever talking about Hamas. I'm going to be quite honest with you. I didn't even hear that word mentioned. I only went to the encampment a few times. Most of the time I was there around the periphery to support and keep our students safe. I don't think I ever heard any discussion of Hamas. But I did hear from colleagues that even the sight of the Palestinian flag on top of our library felt like anti-Semitism to them. And so this is the trickiness of our conversation around what anti-Semitism is and what anti-Semitism isn't. And when I reference the congressional report was a laundry list of similar incidents. So one that I can remember from my time at the Center for Jewish Studies is that there was a young woman during the Intifada in 2014. There was a young woman running for USAC. It's our student council here, the Undergrad Student Affairs Commission. It's a pretty big deal at UCLA. There's 33,000 undergrads, so it's a lot of heated politics happening there. And she was asked by some committee she was running for to explain whether she would have loyalty to Israel. Very crudely asked question. I don't remember the exact wording. I don't think we actually know the exact wording because this was reported out after the fact rather than broadcast live or something like that. But there is a faculty member who supervises that board who described it as being a teaching moment where it was an opportunity to intervene, to explain to the student who asked the question why it was inappropriate and why someone would feel like that was an anti-Semitic question. And apparently they all went away having had a generative conversation about why that was a problem. And yet it is reported as though it was fact that that was an anti-Semitic discriminatory event years later, as in a laundry list of the ways that UCLA has been anti-Semitic for years. And I'll tell you, even in Jewish community spaces, I had been confronted with that story before and had many times had to sort of explain that, well, yes, like there was a moment that happened. And as far as I know, it was sort of talked through and worked out and became a teaching moment. I wish that we were given a chance to have some of those teaching moments where the encampment is concerned. And instead, things got so hostile and so violent so quickly that it became the heavily fortified scenes that then made the national news and made it seem like these were crazy militants wearing masks. A lot of that was the students trying to protect themselves. And even the fire marshal understood that. When he would come by, he'd say, you shouldn't block this. And they were like, yeah, except that people are coming and attacking us. And he sort of let them do it to keep each other safe. And so, that is, I think, the problem in our contemporary discussion around these things is that it is presented as an either or, a black or white, and obviously one way or obviously the other. I'm certainly not going to give Bill Maher any credit for having any insight at all about anything, frankly, but he is just one example of the way that something that started in a sort of shade of gray, this game of telephone, then gets to him and it is presented as absolute fact, black or white. There's no nuance about this at all. And at universities, we live in a world of nuance. And so you'd think we would be encouraging people to have a more nuanced conversation than we've been able to thus far.
Yeah. And so, I know that another interesting part of this story, and this kind of happened with the time, place, and manner changes you discussed a moment ago. I believe they also happened over summer. So faculty come back and these changes are already made. Same thing with this $1 billion lawsuit, right? This is happening, or this $1 billion fine, is happening over summer. So faculty are coming back or discovering this while they're not teaching. But I don't know, do you have any kind of sense of what faculty are thinking in terms of what their response should be to this $1 billion?
I wanted to put it to you, Nolan. I think, I think there's already been a letter distributed by the Faculty Association, which is our AAUP chapter. And it's a beautifully written, eloquent defense of our campus, sharing a lot of the information that I just shared with you. I think we as unionized non-Senate faculty are really trying to figure out what power we might have that could be different, what actions we can actually take here. I can tell you that we are members of both a statewide, it's called CFT, California Federation of Teachers, and a national union, AFT, both of whom have offered their support in any way they can. I would assume that will come with some aggressive lobbying in defense of our university. I know one idea that AAUP leaders have floated is to push a bill that would restore all NSF and NIH funding, not just for us, but for every higher ed campus in the country. I really don't think people understand. UCLA is the number one healthcare provider in Southern California. So when you attack National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health funding, you are essentially breaking the healthcare system in Southern California. So I think that our state legislators understand that. I don't think it's possible that they couldn't, given that there's UCLA health signs all over Southern California. But I think that needs to be said is that when you attack universities, particularly public universities, but not only public universities, you're basically attacking regional economies. Some of our campus, State College, Pennsylvania, Penn State is the number one everything in their area. They're the number one employer. They're the number one healthcare provider. They're the number one job creator. They're engines of local economies. And so I find it pretty hard to believe that the state of California doesn't understand that about the UC. I'd like to see them talk a little bit more about it and be more aggressive about it. But certainly one thing they could do right now is guarantee some backstop funding so that no one will get laid off if the Trump administration proceeds with this. I think we'd like to see that. So there will certainly be action at the state level. There will certainly be action at the federal level. Beyond that, I think we're just still trying to figure it out. Honestly, it is the university finances, as you know, are completely opaque and mystifying to all of us.
By design.
Exactly. So a lot of us genuinely do not understand what could happen if this money is taken away. Like, what will that mean? We know they're already talking austerity. They're already talking about budget deficits. So I can only imagine it will be bad. But, I think there's a lot of interest now in kind of what happens with this other civil rights lawsuit, whether there's any attempts to actually adjudicate discrimination on our campus. If the DOJ wants to investigate discrimination, great. Do you want to investigate whoever's been tagging up hallways on our campus and ripping down signs and leaving menacing racist signage in its place? Do you want to talk about when Charlie Kirk came to our campus in the spring and harassed a bunch of students verbally outside his I just think that we're all still very tender, let's put it that way, from what happened around the encampment. And that wound really has not been healed. It certainly was not healed by bringing in a top cop to investigate the whole thing, paying him $50,000 a month and having him issue a report. It certainly was not healed by spending $12.7 million on law enforcement to remove the encampment and to brutalize our students. And it remains an open wound. And I think the Trump administration knows that. And I think that's why they're needling, they're pushing at our open wound right now. And for those folks who are around, because as you say, I'm always here during the summer, there's like no one around. For folks who are around and who are paying attention, I think it is pushing at that open wound. And, I don't want to exceptionalize Los Angeles again, but he's also pushing at our immigrant students too. I mean, the ICE raids in LA ramped up a week before graduation here at UCLA. So we had to scramble to make sure our students and their families would be protected at graduation. And at least at our labor studies graduation, we were missing half our families, and several of my students didn't show because they didn't feel safe there. So this has been a series of federal attempts to come for Los Angeles. They are purposeful. They are violent. and they are militaristic in every way that they possibly can be. And I've been incredibly proud of the way that our community has fought back and has stood together to protect each other. This one, it feels like we're going to need some help to protect ourselves because the amount of money would not just cripple our campus, but yours and everyone across the state as well. So.
Yeah, and it's worth reminding folks too. When we talk about the fear, obviously, folks who have people in their family who are undocumented are in fear, but that includes folks who have a legal right to be here, because even those folks are rounded up and deported. So for people who say like, well, they did something illegal, no, that's not been the case. And I also find it interesting how you keep bringing up the racism and Islamophobia on campus in addition to anti-Semitism, because at least rhetorically, the last 20, 30 years, liberals and Democrats have claimed that's what they were combating on campus with the DOJ, and Republicans were running around with their hair on fire. But now, if they do it for anti-Semitism, somehow that's okay for the Republicans.
Right.
Now they're ignoring race and Islamophobia. I find that kind of interesting. And I wonder what you say to that. And also, what do you say to folks who say, well, look, Brown and Columbia settled, Harvard's fighting. Why can't UCLA just settle and get this over with? How do you respond to those things?
Well, first, I want to be clear. I am not in any way trying to trivialize or undermine or discredit people's claims of feeling like there was an atmosphere of anti-Semitism on our campus. I know from colleagues, I know from friends that felt very real to people. And I'm not going to tell them that they're wrong in feeling that way. I don't know that I believe there was a lot of substantive base under that, but I think those are challenging conversations that we need to have and to work through those feelings. And I actually am very grateful for my friends and colleagues who were willing to have those conversations with me rather than foreclose on our relationship completely. In terms of that broader context, I mean, I think, gosh, it's really hard to explain other than to cite the fact that there are an equally large group of friends and colleagues, including a group of 78 Jewish faculty members who are just as angry about anti-Semitism being used here as a cudgel to punish other people. There's a lot of different ways of experiencing this moment as Jews, and Jews will tell you they do not agree necessarily about what is even happening. But I do know that I think it's really courageous of Jewish faculty members to come forward and say, do not do this in our name. Like, do not use the threat of anti-Semitism as an excuse to bully and marginalize already marginalized students. I just don't think this DOJ cares, honestly. I don't think they care either way, frankly. I think this is very cynical. I think this is yet another example of the way that justice is being perverted in this moment in this country right now. And so I don't take them seriously when they say they're doing this to fight anti-Semitism, because paying $50,000 to Chabad, how does that fall into? I'm not sure what that accomplishes. I will also say that this is the second largest Jewish community in the United States, Los Angeles. Population here is about 650, 700,000. And it is, as far as I am concerned, the most diverse Jewish population in the country, meaning that we have a large Mizrahi community, Jews from the Middle East. We have this largest community of Persian Jews outside Iran, of Persians generally. We have a large community of what are called Soviet refuseniks, which is to say Jews born under Soviet rule. These folks bring a more conservative politics. They bring a lot of trauma and histories of repression that are fundamentally different than what we think of when we talk about American Jews. Normatively, that is often prefigures Ashkenazi communities who came in the late 19th century, early 20th century, folks from Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe. We have a large Sephardic community as well. That's Jews from Ottoman lands. So there is no consensus orientation around sort of what it means to be a Jew. And I do think that there are Jews in Los Angeles for whom Zionism is a religious belief, or at least it is on parallel with religion in terms of their identity as Jews. So I don't want to undermine that. And I think too often we kind of skip over that and we prefigure Jews for whom anti-Zionism is as much a part of their core identity as anything else. I think both things can be true at once, and we can disavow and be critical of anti-Semitism in all of its forms. Full stop. I don't see any problem with that. What I do think you're getting at is that somehow the violations of a Muslim student who is made to feel intensely uncomfortable on campus, somehow are not equivalent, or somehow are less definable, or somehow are more obscure, or somehow those are microaggressions. But a Jewish student having to look at a Palestinian flag, now that's a real discrimination. And I just think that's abhorrent. And I think many of our faculty here at UCLA think that's abhorrent, which is why this group started sort of surveying those students and cataloging these incidents as well. Students who have stories of their hijabs being ripped at or slurs being directed at them. There are just as many of those. And that's not to mention the fact that students in the encampment were actually physically violently attacked. So if we're going to talk about whose civil rights were violated, and this is exactly what the two dueling lawsuits sort of suggest, they were calling themselves interveners because they said, hold up. If we were going to talk about people's civil rights having been violated in the spring, what about all these other, like there's a whole stack of them right here that you're not even thinking about. So I think when we think about moving forward and healing that wound that they are picking at, it does involve reckoning with both of those histories. It does involve going through all of that and litigating it and really understanding this is a full spectrum of ways that people's rights have been violated. My concern about any kind of settlement that UCLA would do, I mean, I know you mentioned Columbia and Harvard. Any kind of settlement that doesn't involve that would leave the wound still open and would perpetuate exactly the frustrations and injustices that students and faculty have been experiencing over the past couple of years. So I don't think you're wrong to anticipate that they might just settle here. I really hope Gavin and all his tough talking, chest pounding rhetoric will actually be real, and we'll get a real lawsuit here and we'll get some real support from the state. But I wouldn't be surprised if the university found it easier and in their interest to just kind of move past this as quickly as possible. I hope to God that that's not why they're asking for donations right now. That would be really, really cynical. But again, I think this is a real opportunity to defend the values, because the settlement they want is not about anti-Semitism at all. The settlement they want is about trans healthcare at our hospitals. Right. The settlement they want is about getting access to all the admissions data on our students. Like, the settlement they want has nothing to do with the harm that has been done. It has everything to do with this war on DEI that they're waging. And I really think the UC would be foolish to surrender on those principles.
Caroline Luce, you are a wealth of knowledge, and the Trump administration keeps targeting LA. I guess we'll keep interviewing you, which makes me happy.
I don't know what his beef is, man. He's got a golf club down the way. I don't know, like, what? It's all very weird. I just don't.
Can you remind folks where to follow your work?
I have a website. It's my name, all one word. I think you should follow UC-AFT is what you should do. We're UC_AFT, and see how academic unions might be able to put up a fight in this moment. We're the first unionized campus. There are actually 10 campus unions. And it'll be interesting to see what difference that makes when it comes to these kind of settlements. So,
all right. Thank you so much for being on the Disinfo Detox, Caroline.
All right. Talk to you later, Nolan.
Yo, detoxers, this is the Disinfo Detox. Want to keep media literacy alive and kicking? Chip in at patreon.com/disinfodetox. Broke? We get it. Just like, comment, follow, or share. Even your hate helps the algorithm. Thank you for supporting the Disinfo Detox, where media literacy meets breaking news.